Hello there, and welcome to the Ender Lilies Gerrod Only Challenge. In this video, like the title says, I will be playing through Ender Lilies using only the Gerrod Spirit as my main weapon. Why? Well, I have wanted to do a challenge run for a while, and with me replaying through the game after a few years, I was like, why not this? Are there any rules? Well, yes, of course there are rules. A few, but they do exist. First, I can only use Gerrod in order to attack and defeat enemies. Any other source of damage from spirits is not allowed. I will not forbid fall damage, as sometimes it is quite impossible to avoid enemies falling, like with flying enemies. Second rule is that I am allowed to use the abilities that defeating bosses give me. For example, later in the game, I do have the ability to cling to walls, but that is done by a spirit as a passive ability. Those passive ones will be allowed, other than one that I will talk about a bit later, because that one can deal damage. Other than that, anything else is allowed. All relics are available, as long as we can obtain them to gain bonus stats and other abilities. As for skips and glitches, I don't even know any of those. They might exist, I'm not totally sure, but they are off the table. Real quick, let's talk about the game itself. Ender Lilies is a 2D Metroidvania. Now, you might have expected me to say Souls-like from what you have been seeing in the background footage, but in reality, the only thing shared with Souls-like is the dark atmosphere and story, which alone will not make me call it a Souls-like. It is a Metroidvania through and through, with a decent amount of backtracking if you wish to fully complete the game, but quite minimal in an any % style. The story is quite tragic, though most of it is told through letters that you do find throughout the world, or through the relics that you find. There are cutscenes, but most of them are after the main bosses, and they do explain quite a bit of the history of the world you find yourself in. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let's get into the run proper. But before that, if you do enjoy the content, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe to the channel. I do plan on doing more challenge runs in the future and other scripted content as well, so maybe stick around for a while. So the thing is, I have already started the run in the background, as this first part of the game, this first area, poses no real challenge. There's a couple enemies here and there that most of them don't really move, and a lot of them are very easy to just dodge. There's no roadblocks like arenas. Hopefully we don't find any of those. After a bit of walking with no way to defend myself, as I have no weapon to use, I arrive at the first boss of the run, Sigrid. Well, I have no way to damage her, so I guess I'll just avoid her and move on. I see no barriers, so let us go. Oh, that's not good, and hasn't been foreshadowed a bit earlier in the video. Yep, that's the run. I can't do more than this, as you can skip bosses, and there's no alternate route that I could take to get past Sigrid. Also, even if I could get past her, I would still have to get over a bunch of platforms that require me to get the ability that the boss gives me after defeating her. But, as you can see, the video's not over, so yes, I will bend the rules a bit in order to make this work. I am allowed to beat the first two bosses using the Night Spirit and while at level 1. Why two bosses? Well, in the game, in order to acquire new weapons, like Gerrod, and offensive abilities, you need to purify spirits. That means defeating them first, and then, boom, you can use it as your weapon. Gerrod is unfortunately the second boss of the game, and will require me to use the Night Spirit to beat him. Even if he wasn't a boss, but just a normal spirit you can find, I would still have to defeat him. Now, the fight itself wouldn't have been that bad of a thing if I wasn't 1 HP for the last third of the fight. God, that was really nerve-wracking. I could have just gave up and come back with full HP, But with nothing else other than Knight, the fight would take a long time anyways. Normally, by this point, with a little bit of exploration, you would have a couple spirits ready and some upgrades. But with this challenge, we got none. With Gerrod defeated and me on 1 HP, his spirit has been acquired. So now I can go bonk all the horror, I mean all the blighted around. Yes, that's right, the blighted. I'm finally allowed to fight enemies and gain XP. Well, just what even are levels though? Well, it's not really explained that well to begin with, as there's no real tutorial, but from what I have gathered, with each level you do gain a bit of damage. But that's about it. Well, also bosses do get some scaling depending on your level too, though I do wonder why the game has an RPG system. It's not Skyrim after all. Other than that, the other ways to get more stats is by using relics for more damage or more health, finding amulet pieces which do give you more health, or upgrading your spirits for more damage on your basic attacks. To upgrade the spirits though, you do require a special resource. Normal ones take Stagnant Blight, which is a lot more plentiful, and the boss spirits require Furious Blight, which, since it's for boss spirits, it takes a lot longer to get. Normally, in a playthrough, you get enough for a couple normal spirits, 4 or 5 I believe, and 2 boss ones. But a lot of the Furious Blight is locked behind using other spirits in order to get past certain obstacles. Like a bit more, not even intense platforming, but it's more like gaining some distance that you can't without those. This in the end will leave Gerrod not being fully upgraded, but it won't be that big of a deal as the damage isn't that insane. You might be asking, why are you already at the 3rd boss in an entirely different area? Well, that's the thing. Ender Lilies is not really that hard of a game. Enemies do hit like a truck usually, but I also hit like one too as well. Plus, to be honest, if there was no level system, I could just skip 90% of the enemies and only fight the bosses. But with me wanting to explore as much so I can find resources, and I do want to fight more enemies, because for that. Plus, I will go a bit more in depth into the areas we traverse as we get into the more spicy parts of the game. You know, the harder areas that actually matter more. Now, on to the boss. It did take a couple of tries, as by this point I knew I had to play more slowly, even though I had the second attack, but I just didn't. I didn't listen to my own advice. And the worst part is that a lot of the bosses, as you will soon see, have increased speed and attack speed when entering their 3rd phase specifically. So that takes a while to get accustomed to when all you want to do is bonk people to their doom, and that takes a long time to do as the weapon is very slow. One lucky thing is that the fact that I did play through like 60% of the game right before starting the run. So I had a lot of the patterns still in mind, but it did take a while to defeat her. And now, with Eileen's defeat, we can swim. But we can't attack. Yes, underwater combat is impossible with this spirit. The best part is that fortunately there is no mandatory water combat in the game. There is a collectible that is behind an underwater enemy, but that is not required to beat the game. This pretty much saved the run, as if a later game boss was underwater. While I could still have used the knight to beat it, it would have made the run more illegitimate than it already is, and it would have 100% taken a long time to fight with a level 1 knight. Next up is the area I honestly hate the most. Well, second most out of all areas, but we'll get into that other one a bit later. Not sure why, but ever since my first playthrough, this area emanates an aura that makes me dislike it. There's hanky and annoying enemies that sometimes are even hanging from ceilings and shooting a ton of projectiles, or also the area being a lot more labyrinth-like than anything until now. But honestly, nothing beats the boss of the area, Guardian Silva. The fight is quite similar to Sigrid, mainly in just looks, but Silva does have an entirely different moveset that's tailored for more advanced players to deal with. A lot more aggressive, and since I'm using a very slow hammer, a lot harder to dodge. Weirdly enough, this was one of the bosses that took me the longest to beat. It felt as if some of the later game bosses were a lot easier compared to Silva when it comes to their movesets. It is entirely possible that the catacombs are a later game area, as I have heard that you can actually do things in different orders than what I usually do, but I haven't actually tried that out. In the 3 playthroughs I have done, until now, I went on the same route every time. Either way, after about 25 minutes or so, I did manage to defeat Silva and obtain the next ability. The amazing, unique, mighty ability to not fall on my face after dashing. No need for plastic surgery after all. And now, with the ability to dash further, we can progress through to the next area. This one is sort of a winter-themed area, which also has twin spires that you need to ascend. The area itself looks really pretty, but it does contain a bunch of really annoying enemies. I just think that other than the next area, this current one, alongside the endgame areas, have the most annoying enemies. Crows that teleport, gargoyles that swoop in but can easily disengage while damaging you, axe-throwing maniacs, and AoE damage for eyeballs. They all make you having a slow weapon a nightmare. Well, not the axe throwers really, because those are kinda slow and they don't move. But if you don't have enough poise damage to bring the gargoyles to the ground in one combo, you either need to do one hit and then retreat, or hope that you end up attacking fast enough. Similar with the eyes, as they have specific timings that you need to follow in order to defeat them, because if you mistime it, you're gonna get quite a lot of damage done to you. This is where the damage from spirit upgrades and leveling comes in handy, as some of the enemies do end up defeated in 1 or 2 hits by endgame. But we're not there yet, unfortunately, so let's continue. With the area itself behind me, it is time for the next boss, Ove the Mad Knight. This was another long one, mainly because of the weirdly low damage output I had. This is where I realized that the game is quite literally designed with the player having pretty much 3 spirits equipped at all times, no matter which ones. Of course, I had a basic attack spirit, but the loss of DPS from lacking support spirits was finally being seen here, and in the next boss fights too. While I did talk about taking fights slow and not being impatient, this is actually where I finally started taking my own advice. Having really long tries, because of low overall damage, took a toll on me, and I was like, no, this is taking too long. The third phase was really what I got stuck on, as the speed of the boss alongside the AoE attack did pose a bit of a challenge until I got used to them and how to actually even get through the AoE attack to get 2 free hits in. But honestly, there was nothing else that was too much, and it was a pretty easy win after that. Also, remember talking about a wall clean ability not too long ago? Well, here we have it, and it is going to allow us a way into the next area. This one has some slight similarities with the previous one, but that is only that they take place in some form of medieval structure. This area is based on a king's castle, and has all the things you might find here. Giant rooms, battle structures, horse riders, knights, etc. I did mention earlier that this area is a lot less annoying, and that is because a lot of the enemies here are more predictable and have easier telegraphs. The castle itself has a bunch of arena-styled rooms where you get locked up in them and have to defeat enemies before proceeding, and it is quite awful, as a very long room filled with a bunch of arenas is present not long before the boss. But as I said, the enemies aren't that bad. For example, the shield knights, you can easily dodge behind them, and when they would be to attack behind themselves, it's a very easy and quite long telegraph. But the boss is also very similar to this. It was the easiest one of them all, without taking the first in consideration. It did still take me a similar amount of time, similar to Sylva and Olv, but that was because of two things. First, it was the mechanic that you can't damage the boss from the front, just like a lot of the knights that are present inside the castle. And second, because the fight itself was taking a really long time. So sometimes I would be a bit too impatient during a try at the fight, and I would take too much damage. The final phase in it of itself was also really okay. Combos were done faster by the boss, but the new attack with the laser beam was quite easy to dodge, and you can even get a bunch of attacks in while he's casting it. The fight did remind me a lot of Souls fights though, as you were usually waiting and baiting attacks before dodging through the boss to get a couple hits in. Now, with Julius defeated, we get the first and, well, only ability that's somewhat forbidden to use. Now, after dashing, if I keep the button pressed, the character will be picked up by Julius and start charging forward. The charge itself does no damage, but if you attack while in this charging mode, then the character will do a stab attack and can damage enemies. This is needed to get past some doors, but will not be used for combat. Well, with that out of the way, it's time to go onward. Finding myself in a room filled with flowers and no way out, I decided to touch them. And so, game is done. As I said, it was pretty easy, it's really short, and that's the challenge. Or not! Yes, the game does have multiple endings, with an early ending to boot. I do wonder how many of you actually checked how much time was left in the video when I said that it's over, and the ending started playing. The next area is one that I skipped quite a lot in it. While also getting a bit lucky, as I found the boss without having to go into all the different cells and rooms around the stockade. Why I just went past all the enemies? They are amazingly tanky and annoying to deal with while wielding a very slow weapon like Gerrod. Some attacks are really fast to the point that you get a very small window of time to dodge after an attack. The stockade also gives you a bit of a scare in the first part of the area, as that is underwater. Of course, that is scary only for this challenge, and for whatever other spirits are unusable underwater. This is also where the first two collectibles that are tied to underwater combat lie. Not something major, just relic that isn't usable for me anyways. There's also this little place behind a bunch of spike balls that is somewhere you really do not want to be, because of the area mechanic and enemies. Though this I will talk about in just a bit, but I wanted to mention it as I found the entrance to the verboten domain before the boss. The boss of the stockade is Honir, the Keeper of the Abyss. Though he's not in the Abyss, nor at its entrance. Whatever, those are small details, no one really cares. What I do care about is that this guy is really agile and throws knives at me. That's not very nice. If I remember correctly, I do think this was the boss I was stuck on for the longest when I first played the game. It was quite a long time ago and I don't really remember the details. But in the current timeline, it only took me a few tries to defeat him. The fight itself is not that hard. He does continuously spawn enemies though, but if you do bait him into going on one side of the arena and then take care of the other enemies, then the fight becomes a lot easier. So yeah, as long as you take care of the newly spawned enemies as well, because he does spawn them further into the fight only gets harder in phase 3 when Honir gains the flip ability. Here though, all you have to do is dodge it, as it is quite predictable, and then do an attack and repeat until dead. So, we were able to enter the verboten domain even before defeating Honir, and this is where I think the multiple possible paths through the game might be more apparent. Honir does allow us to hook onto lanterns that can be found throughout the game in order to more easily pass through certain rooms or to be able to get to secrets that were inaccessible before, but while that helps with this new area, it is something else entirely. Oh boy. Remember that I said that the catacombs were my second most hated area? Well, verboten domain is taking number 1. Congratulations, sir, here is your medal, and there is the podium. Why though? Well, it's a combination of hard-to-deal enemies and an area mechanic that's just pure annoyance. The enemies are really tanky and really fast. Of course, it makes sense because we're talking about a literal final area, but still, sometimes they are too much. And so I skipped like 90% of encounters. The other 10% were either unavoidable, or taking out the enemy made the journey less annoying. What about the area mechanic? Well, let's just call it as it is. Poison clouds. And no, not the ones that some enemies spawn. No. Entire areas, if not even entire rooms, being covered in poison that do damage to you for as long as you sit in it. Same with the water, it's also poisonous. Yes, the heretic mask I got earlier does allow you to stay for longer, but when you combine the poison alongside a bunch of enemies that are tanky and hit very hard, then it can be a bit unfair. Also, don't get me started on the giant blob enemies that just two-shot you while having almost maxed out health. Like, what the verboten domain is going on? Either way, rant aside, let's continue. The verboten domain does end with a boss, and that is Muriel the Beloved. Big as a truck and hit like one too. If I do get hit, even with a heal almost fully healing me, I still get one shot afterwards, like what? Honestly, at this point I did decide that enough was indeed enough, and I did go ahead and pretty much got all the collectibles from the game. Spirits, relics, amulet fragments, anything that would help me, which they all did. All the amulet fragments led to me having a lot more health and being able to heal more reliably, while the relics collected gave me more damage, more heals, and damage reduction. Generally, other than spirit fights, which I will have a couple here and there wasn't much to show, just me going through areas already explored and using the abilities to find everything hidden. With my newfound power, I was able to take down Muriel after a couple tries. The interesting part was that she isn't the one that I need to purify like the other bosses. That is Phaedon the Heretic. Muriel was soulless by this point, so there's no need for purification. With Phaedon purified, I can finally go trick-or-treating at all those random locked doors throughout the game. Did anyone say montage? I heard montage. So, you might be asking why not just finish the game at this point? You already have all you need. Well, while you are right, dear viewer, I do have relics and health galore. But I am missing one important thing. The ability to get the true ending of the game and fight the second part of the final boss. You see, without the Aegis Curio that I just crafted, you are unable to fight the true final boss and get the true ending of the game, and so I had to go on a backtracking quest in order to get all the stone tablets, most of them being behind the doors, and gain the ability to craft the Curio. And now, with the Aegis around our neck, it is time to go down into the abyss. I'd say this is where Honir should have been located, but whatever. This area is honestly whatever. Visually it's stunning, and even the sound direction is awesome. Really love the feel that it's weirdly alive. I did think about putting it as an annoying area to stand on the podium with verboten domain in the catacombs, but honestly, after doing the fish grind to get level 100 for an achievement, it wasn't that bad. The fish enemies are really easy to deal with, and there are no real hazards throughout the area. It's also really small, as it is only supposed to be a transitional part before the final boss fight. And with the final save before the last boss, I am truly ready. Well, this would have been supposed to sound determined, but in reality what comes next is somewhat disappointing, really. Remember how I said that a lot of the bosses after Silva feel very moveset heavy and not that hard at all? Well, the final boss, the Blighted Lord, took me only 2 tries. Yes, 2 tries for a boss I haven't fought in years, as the second playthrough I didn't finish. The only reason it was 2 tries was because during the true boss phase I got hit by a high damaging move, and then I got sniped by a fish. Those damn fish! Then, during the second try, it all went very smoothly. The thing is that sitting in the middle of the arena while slightly in the air is the perfect spot to dodge a lot of the attacks, and even deal with the spawning enemies. The only attack that requires you to get out of there is the explosion attack, but it's entirely possible you can just block or dodge it. I did like the narrative though. The original White Priestess having taken in so much blight that she became its new source, and also the fact that around the end of the true boss phase, similarly to the Hollow Knight boss from Hollow Knight, the Blighted Lord does try to stop itself, as the priestess is shining through because of the purification Lily's attempting. In the end, if you do not equip the Curio, the game does end in a more somber note, as you end up staying with the corrupted priestess in order to share the burden of keeping the blight at bay together. Within the other ending, with the help of the Curio, Lily is able to cure the priestess of the blight, and in the end, the rain fades away and the sun shines once more, with Lily and the priestess seemingly being able to finally leave and live a life. Well, with the final boss defeated and the ending cutscene being done playing, the only other thing I can do is let my past self do the final send-off. Yeah, I know. Weird. And thus we have arrived at the end of the journey. Weirdly enough, I'm actually doing this before even writing the script, because I thought to myself, why not make this as close to the actual end of the playthrough as possible. I did go through one more fight with the boss without the actual amulet, because you do get a new relic from that. You do get a relic that allows you to showcase Lily as her pure self or as her blighted self, depending on which ending you do. And if you do both, you get both, which is really cool in my opinion. And it's understandable. But yeah, the final boss wasn't that hard. To be totally fair, even the true ending phase, which I thought that was the boss fight proper, but it seems like it was a true ending phase, wasn't even that bad. Now, the game itself isn't really the hardest. I do feel in a way that it's entirely probable that specific parts of the world itself were harder than some of the bosses. Verboten domain to begin with, and the catacombs, which are purely just annoying, and especially going under-leveled in places like the Stockade. Now, the reason I wanted to fight the final boss again and get those relics is because I wanted to try to get as much done as possible throughout the playthrough, which, as you can see, I did this. If you remember earlier, I did talk about the fact that before Mariel's fight, I did go ahead and catch and get every little bit that I can get. There are a couple rooms left, but these all require other spirits. which I will go ahead and do because this is the closest save file I have to a 100% completion. So yeah, the save file will be converted into my main file now that I am done with the playthrough. Like, this one requires me to use any spirit that can be used underwater, same in this room here. And then these two rooms have the Blight, the Furious Blight, the 800 ones. So that's that. There's also another thing that I haven't gotten to upgrade Gerrod to max, unfortunately. 13 off. I could have went and done that, but I felt after trying the boss fight for the first time that there was no need for that. But yeah, the game is beautiful. I have loved the game in its looks ever since I first saw it, and it just plays right into what I like when it comes to Metroidvania. Music is a bit repetitive, and fights in general aren't that hard. But I feel like it's a Metroidvania worth playing if you're a fan of that genre. So yeah, this was an interesting journey for my first ever challenge run. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, do please leave a like, comment or subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.